My body was scattered across the city. A dismembered arm, a severed leg, each piece of me lying in separate trash cans left to rot among the city's waste. My husband Brandon was the officer in charge of the case, his gaze as indifferent as ever as he stared at what remained of me. A week earlier Brandon had been the one who sent me to rehab, dragging me away while our son Jack cheered at the sight of my misery. Finally, I don't have to see you under the influence anymore, Jack had said, his young face twisted in disgust. I had thought that maybe, just maybe, after coming out of rehab, things could be different. I could make amends. I could see Jack smile again without that hatred in his eyes. The editor reminds you. Search 22,721 on the GoodNovel app to read the full story. Wonderful content continues to play. Part 3. Brandon couldn't shake the voice from his head. Ren's faint, desperate plea echoed through his thoughts as he sat in his car, staring blankly at the city around him. The desperation in her voice kept replaying, a broken record of fear that wouldn't stop. He tried to rationalize it, tried to convince himself it was a prank, an elaborate mistake, but deep down, he knew better. There was something chillingly real about that voice, something that twisted in his gut and refused to let go. He parked outside Olivia's house, her laughter drifting out through the open window, mixing with Jack's excited chatter. It was a scene of happiness, a life he had fought so hard to build, yet today, it felt distant. He watched them from the car, feeling like a stranger and outsider peering into a world that wasn't quite his anymore. Jack noticed him first, his small face lighting up with excitement. He burst out of the front door, his shoes slapping against the pavement as he ran towards the car. "Dad, did you catch the bad guys?" he asked, his voice full of innocent curiosity, eyes wide with admiration. Brandon forced a smile, patting Jack's head, the weight of his hand gentler than usual. "Not yet, buddy. But I will," he promised, his voice sounding hollow even to his own ears. His eyes drifted to Olivia, who was standing by the door, her playful smile directed at him. She seemed oblivious to the storm brewing inside him, to the dark cloud that had been slowly gathering above his head. "Come on inside," Olivia called, her voice sweet and warm. Brandon nodded, scooping Jack up into his arms as they walked back to the house. The warmth of Jack's small body against his chest felt grounding, a momentary distraction from the sense of dread that had settled in his bones. Later, as the evening settled, Brandon sat on the couch, trying to immerse himself in the sounds around him, Jack's innocent laughter, Olivia's comforting presence. But Ren's words, that haunting plea, kept pulling him back, tugging at the corners of his mind like an insistent shadow. He glanced at his phone, the unknown number still sitting in his call history, a silent reminder, mocking him with its existence. Olivia, sensing his unease, touched his shoulder, her voice soft. "Brandon, are you okay? You seem distracted." Her eyes were filled with concern, and she tilted her head, trying to meet his gaze. He looked at her, her face bathed in the soft glow of the living room light, and he nodded. "I'm fine," he lied, his voice strained, the words catching in his throat. "Just a tough case." Olivia smiled, a tender expression that made his chest ache with guilt. She leaned in closer, her warmth almost enough to thaw the ice that had settled in his veins. "You'll solve it. You always do." She kissed his cheek, her trust in him unwavering, and Brandon tried, really tried, to let her warmth wash away the unease. He wrapped an arm around her, pulling her closer, hoping that maybe if he held her tight enough, he could silence the voices in his head. But it lingered, stubborn, refusing to fade. That night, Olivia and Jack went to bed, their soft breathing filling the quiet of the house. Brandon stayed up, staring at his phone on the coffee table. The house felt too quiet, the shadows in the corners darker than they had ever seen before. He could still hear Ren's voice, could still feel the chill it had left behind, a whisper of something he could neither ignore or fully understand. As the clock neared midnight, the silence was broken by the buzzing of his phone. Brandon's heart leapt into his throat, his eyes snapping to the screen. The same unknown number flashed across it, the glowing digit seeming to pulse in the darkness. His hand trembled slightly as he reached for it, dread sinking deep into his bones. He hesitated, fear gripping him tightly. What if it was her again? When he finally answered, the voice on the other end was a chilling whisper, barely audible over the static. Heavy breathing filled the line, followed by words that made his blood run cold. "Brandon. They're coming." The line went dead before he could say anything, before he could even fully process what he had heard. He sat there in the dim light of the living room, the phone still pressed to his ear, his body frozen. The darkness around him seemed to close in, the weight of those words sinking into his skin. A cold sweat broke out across his forehead, and for the first time in a long time, Brandon Damon felt utterly, completely helpless. Something was coming for him, and he wasn't ready. Want to know more? Search 22,721 on the GoodNovel app to read the full story.